So good morning and welcome to panel 3 programming as part of Leading Big in Small Places online event. This is a culmination of a cohort leadership that is a program sponsored by the University of Michigan, the Library of Michigan, and the Institute of Human Library Services. You can use chat to add questions, ask anything during this panel. We have 4 panelists with us. We have Erin Schmändt from Caro Area District Library, Stephanie Daniels from Hartford Public Library, Amy Beckman from Millington-Arbela District Library, and Cindy Place from Bel Air Public Library. All of our presenters this morning are directors of public libraries here in Michigan. They're from all around the state, and they will be providing information in each of their sessions this morning on the topic of programming. We're going to go ahead and get started with the first presentation from Erin. I'll forward your slides for you, Erin, and you can go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Erin Schmändt. I am the director of the Caro Area District Library. Next slide, please. Caro is located in the thumb of Michigan, over here. We are a Class 3 library, a pretty large one actually. We're only about 100 people away from being a Class 4, so we serve just under 12,000 people. It's a very rural area, as you can see from what I have up here on the slide, lots of fields. And our 2 biggest employers in town are a sugar beet factory and an ethanol plant, which for those of you who aren't farm people, ethanol takes corn and turns it into fuel. So if you're not related to a farmer or married to a farmer, you're definitely involved in the overall field. So our community is made up of a lot of down-to-earth farmer types, and we also trend towards older adults, which I think a lot of the rural areas of Michigan do demographically. We are also the county seat, so we sort of attract some of the economically depressed in the community because there are a lot of state and county services that are easily accessible to us. Can you go ahead and advance the slide, please? So how do we know what our patrons want from us? A couple of years ago, my assistant director and I participated in the Harwood Institute training from Library of Michigan, and we did a series of community conversations. And in those conversations, you start talking to your community and you ask them, what do you want your community to be? And I really especially think in areas like ours, people tend to just put their feet one in front of the other, put your head down, go to work every day. And you don't necessarily, you may think about what your community is, but you don't think about what you want it to be. And so what we found out was that our community has a lot of wide open spaces, fields and forests, but we also have really high rates of obesity, smoking, and other really unhealthy habits. Next slide, please. But while we have some of those issues, we also found out that a lot of residents talked about wanting opportunities to live active, healthy lifestyles. I personally was raised by generations of farmers. And so while I know that we all know how to do hard work, that doesn't necessarily equal healthy lifestyles. You eat your meat and potatoes, you go out and put your boots on and do the chores, but are you getting your cardio? Are you eating green things? Maybe if it's summer and you grew some green things in the garden. In the winter, probably not. You're opening something you canned and put in the basement. And I mean, it's vegetables, but it's not really vegetables. So we started having some conversations about how the community could have a more healthy, active lifestyle. And those conversations got some things happening with the local parks. The picture you're seeing here is actually a walking trail. We found there were a lot of chopped up walking trails in town and people wanted those to be connected. So those things started happening after the conversations. But the next question was then, how can the library help? How can we help these people live active, healthy lifestyles? Next slide, please. Okay, well, what we can do is we can teach them new activities that will add to active, healthy lifestyles. Now you wonder, why the library? Why should we be the people teaching them how to do these things? Why not the hospital or doctors or nutritionists or whatever? Well, the good thing is they trust us. We have been teaching them new things for decades. We've been teaching them literacy activities for their children. We teach computer classes. We've been teaching them how to make wreaths out of recycled pop bottles, all kinds of strange things. And so they trust us. So that makes us in a good position to help them with this. Next slide, please. The first wellness program that we started was Walking Club. It's a pretty simple program. We do it on Tuesdays at 12:15, so people can come on their lunch break if they have a 12 to 1 lunch break. We walk about 35 minutes, which equates to about 1.65 miles in our community. And we have a core crew. You'll see them in the picture of Winter. They are intrepid. They are coming no matter what the weather. They will put on spikes on their shoes. They will wear face masks to keep their nose from freezing. But we also have all sorts of other people that show up from time to time. We have families that bring their strollers or their dogs. And we have a group from the Tuscola Behavioral Health System that brings people that are trying to live healthier lifestyles sometimes. And we just walk, and they enjoy having relationships with each other and talking about what they did in the last week, and it gets them out and gets them moving. The great thing about that is the only cost is staff time. We just use the sidewalks around the library and spend a little bit of time walking out in the fresh air. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next wellness program we decided to try out was meditation. Now, I was a little bit worried about this one because it's a little bit wooey for our community. Lots of, like I said, good old farmers, but not necessarily things that make you focus on your inner self. So meditation was a little bit concerning for me, but actually it turned out really well. My assistant director is very into meditation, and so she's the one that leads this program normally. Pre-pandemic, we did it every Wednesday morning at 9:30 in person. She would lead it, but we used recorded meditations that we found online. She has some specific people that she really enjoys and that she uses. And then she would sit in the room with them. We did receive a small grant. For those of you that are familiar with Thrivent Financial, they give out little $250 grants. And we were able to get some floor cushions and yoga mats and things for people who like to sit on the floor. And then a lot of people normally sit in a chair. Personally, when I have to fill in, I have to sit on the floor because meditating makes me fall asleep, but it's very relaxing. During the pandemic, we moved this program online because, of course, we shouldn't have been sitting together and breathing each other's breath. So what we do is every week we post a new meditation. They're listed as Wednesdays at 9:30, but they can be accessible at any time. So this is still going pretty well. We had between 2 and 10 people in person, and eventually we'll get back to in person, but we're still doing this one online right now. Next slide, please. Yoga is something that we had done a few different times, but just like one individual session of chair yoga in our community. And this summer, we wanted to do as many programs as we could outside. And so we were able to contact a local instructor, yoga instructor, and she was a little bit concerned at first because she said that people like the concept of outdoor yoga, but it can be very distracting because you're supposed to be focusing again on your inner breathing and your inner self. And, there's cars driving by, there's dogs barking, it might start to rain or whatever happens. But actually, this is the little GIF you're seeing is our first session. We had, I think, 15 people. We had people of all ages, little people, older people, people that had never been to yoga before, people that go to yoga all the time. And it was really lovely. We found that we had to move to the other side of the library for the next session because this was right next to the road, and the DPW decided to drive some excavators past several times, and that was quite distracting. But many people were newbies and they really enjoyed it. And so this is something that was considered a big success, and we're definitely going to do it again next year. The instructor was also very happy as to how that went. Next slide, please. Zumba is something that I really enjoy on a personal level. I go a couple times a week when I can. And something I'd thought about offering at the library before, but our meeting room is just not big enough for this. I mean, you need a lot of space. People are dancing and you need furniture out of the way, and you don't want them, kicking each other or the walls or those kinds of things. And so I contacted a local Zumba instructor, and she was happy to do it. She'd been leading, because of the pandemic, she'd been leading a lot of Zumba classes in driveways and other places around the area. And she thought the library parking lot would be great because we had lots of wide open spaces. We did have the participants scout the area where they were going to be dancing first, just to make sure if they, obviously we have a few cracks and things in the parking lot, but just make sure that they knew where they were. They brought water. We provided water as well. We had a great turnout, even though one day it was over 90 degrees with 95% humidity, one of those nice suns where it's glaring red hot at you and there's like a big haze around it. But everybody, the instructor was very good about talking about making sure you work on your own level. If this is something you're new to, make sure you're paying attention to your body and how it feels. If you're somebody who does it all the time and you want to, put it up on a level, go for it. And the other thing that I thought was a positive, which could have turned into a negative, but the loud pulsing music brought a lot of our neighbors outside to go, what's going on over there? What are those people at the library doing? And so that was actually a positive. We had a lot of people ask questions and be very interested in that. Next slide, please. So I just brought some tips here on how to offer more wellness programs. I highly suggest starting with something that you or your other staff members either know about or very passionate in, because I feel like the passion of the staff helps to put that through the whole community. Like, oh, this is something the library is doing. Oh, they're interested. Sounds fun. If you're confident to do it yourself, go ahead. If not, I would suggest finding a community partner or a local instructor. We had a grant to pay the local instructors for yoga and Zumba this summer. But if you do not have funds to do that, sometimes you can talk. When we did the one-off chair yoga sessions, we had a local instructor that donated her time for that. And also the MSU Extension has a lot of experts. I know for sure that they lead meditation classes, and they have a lot of experts that can do other things. Sometimes, even if you go to their website and look at their list, there are things they offer that aren't necessarily on the list. So I suggest calling them and bringing up what it is you want to do. And then my last suggestion is just try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If you have nobody that shows up, then you can either try it a couple more times to see if that was a fluke, or you can just stop doing it. You can always, I think libraries have a hard time sometimes stopping doing programs when they're not working. So just try it out. Next slide, please. We're going to offer questions at the end of the whole panel, but there are some resources here, which when they post the slides, these will be accessible to you. And feel free to either email me or call me if you have questions on an individual level. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. So next up, our panelist is Stephanie Daniels from Hartford Public Library.
Stephanie Daniels with the Hartford Library, how technology has changed our summer reading programs. We are a Class 2 district library in rural Southwest Michigan, and we serve 5,700 patrons. Our community is a diverse population of Caucasian, Hispanic, African Americans, and Native Americans. Hartford has had a public library since 1925. We are a low-income community. Next slide, please. Okay. The summer reading began actually as early as the 1890s, and it was mainly older elementary children, grades 6 through 9. And then we got our first children's department in a public library in 1913. In the 20s, we gave out certificates for recognition for completing list of books. And in the 20s was the first state-run library program. In the 20s to the 40s, the themes were the trend. Usually it was travel and vacation. In the 40s, we had preschoolers became included in the reading clubs. And in the 50s, teens and the YAs were considered as a group. In the 70s came the entrance of the fast food coupons for crafts and other activities. Next slide, please. Also in the 80s, reading kits were the trend. Not many prizes, and there was paper-only tracking. We see now during the pandemic now we're going back to the grab-and-go kits, and we continue them now. The first computer use was in summer reading in the late 1980s. In the 90s, programs shifted from regional to state levels, where you had state themes. And then websites were popular also. And you had the first outreach programs where you had newspapers and classroom visits. And in the early 20,000, Charlotte teens had to track the reading. They had tracked reading online, and there was a mail reading program where the library would mail out books to children, and they would mail them back, and then they track the reading online. Next slide, please. Why do we track? Well, for a small rural library, it's very important to track the books because we like to know what's popular. For instance, what's popular in one library is not going to be popular in another. Last year, it was Bad Kitty. This year, it's Mo Williams. And last year, it was vampires. This year, it's zombies. So when you have a small budget, you have to really know what's popular in order to keep everybody reading. Next slide, please. I polled a lot of libraries in Michigan, and these are the types of ways they track. Some with minutes. Minutes is beneficial for slower readers. And pages. Pages is good for the read to me's because it certainly gives the parent-child interaction. And also it does interact with the librarian herself. And titles. Titles is another good one, because again, the teens like the titles because they can list them online. And a lot of libraries use all the choices, and a lot of them they get to choose whatever contract they'd like to do. The main thing is we want to engage our readers, no matter what method they use for reporting. Next slide, please. The popular digital tools are Wandu Reader. We've used that an awful lot, and it's the Library of Michigan has let us use this for free, and a lot of librarians use this. And you can gauge it for activities and certificates. It's a good source. Beanstack is another wonderful source, and a lot of the larger libraries use Beanstack. There is a charge for Beanstack. There's another one called Engaged Readers, and that is similar to Wandu Reader. It's a social networking software. Next page. Reader Zone. Reader Zone is similar to Beanstack. And Read Square is popular within the United States in other areas. I don't know of anyone using that in Michigan. Next slide. So it's easier. We use them all. We let them choose whatever method they like to use, whether they like to do minutes, whether they like to use pages, whether they like to use titles. Actually, pages has been the most popular with us. Titles for the teens has been popular. Adults like the titles also. Digital isn't always better because we have a big gap of internet connection in our community. So there's many people that can't use digital. So we still use the paper logs. And we always it's always wonderful when a child comes in and gives you that log and you see that smile on his face and you ask him, well, which books did he like best? And he usually tells you a story of what he enjoyed. Next slide, please. If you're in our area, please stop into the Hartford Public Library. This is our brand new library, which opened on September 8th, 2020. It's right in the heart of town. And here's the list of cited works that I used for my material. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. So our next panel presenter is Amy Beckman. Amy's a director at Millington-Arbela District Library.
Good morning, everyone. Just a little disclaimer, at our library right now, we are doing story time. So if you hear excited voices or something, I'm in my office, but I am the assistant director at the Millington-Arbela District Library, which is ironically pretty close to where Erin's library is out in the Thumb. We are a Class 3 library that serves about 7,500 patrons. And I've been here at the library for almost 3 years in December. Next slide, please. Some of my reasoning for offering the resume workshops was because of the pandemic, our local Tuscola County Michigan Works was actually closed. And when I called there to ask what they offered for resume help, they were not doing in-person appointments until August of 2021. So very recently did they start doing in-person appointments. And I just thought that was something that people might be looking for at this time. And then also, since I've been here at the library in 2019, just with computer use, we are just a big hub for that. I think that's where we get most of our foot traffic. We would have a lot of patrons come in, and I don't know if you've had this, but they bring their resume in on a piece of paper and it's maybe crumpled up, and they're wanting to edit it or add to it or change it because they are trying to apply for jobs. So I just saw that there was a great demand here in our community for help in this specific area. Also with what's been going on with the jobs in all over, that maybe people were looking for an opportunity to either re-enter the workforce, or they were also maybe going to try to explore some different job opportunities. Next slide, please. So kind of the setup that I used for our resume workshops, I was trying to get away from like a workshop where everybody came at one session for maybe an hour, and there were a lot of different people that maybe had a lot of different specific needs. I also thought there might be concerns as far as we're in a pretty small community, but as far as privacy, maybe people didn't feel comfortable coming to a session where they might see other people in the community that they didn't want them to know that they were looking for a different job, or didn't want them to know that they had recently lost their job. So what I pivoted towards were one-on-one appointments in about 30-minute time slots. It was something that I advertised in a lot of different areas in the community, and it was something that definitely my staff knew about. So it something that we made sure to communicate with staff to get the word out, especially if they had a computer user come in that maybe was doing something with resumes, that they could try to connect them with this workshop. I did kind of stick with a schedule of when I was offering them, but I did have the ability to have appointments outside of those scheduled times if it didn't fit a patron's availability. But I put it at first when I was at the library. So to try to make it convenient for yourself, don't try to schedule it outside of a time that isn't convenient for you, to see how it goes. Next slide, please. Kind of like I mentioned a little bit before, I worked really hard to try to advertise this at local places. So we have a village or a township office here in Millington, and I posted something on the bulletin boards there. We have a local community center. They were created as events on our Facebook pages and things of that nature. I did offer free things because usually that draws people in. So I did offer free flash drives for people attending the workshops, and I advertised about them on the flyer. I know in some communities we're kind of moving away from that with Gmail and Google Drive and things of that nature, but we do have a kind of a aging community as well that aren't as familiar with email and things of that nature. So if you were able to work with that patron on their resume, you were just able to save it right on that flash drive, and they were able to take it wherever they needed to make more copies or things like that. It's kind of a universal device. And that just lists some of the prices there. I hadn't looked at them in a while and realized that they are really getting quite inexpensive for a decent size flash drive. Next slide, please. And then for the resumes, and then I'll talk about how I transitioned to like a job search workshop. This was just kind of the sign-up sheet I had at the desk for staff. So it just showed the date that the next one was being offered, it had the time slots, wrote down the patron name, their phone number, to ask what they're seeking help with, so that I could kind of prepare if it was more of a, maybe like a construction job, or they were looking for something in business or things of that nature. I could kind of be a little bit more prepared to how to cater that resume. Also, not that by any means was I an expert at creating resumes or things of that nature, but to just offer the best services that we could when the Tuscola County, Michigan Works is actually in Caro. So it can be a drive for people in our community to get there. And if they're seeking employment or they're in between jobs, they might not have that extra cash to be able to drive all the way there and back and things like that. And then also at the bottom was to take their information. if they were interested, but that the time or date didn't work for them. And then I could follow up after that. Next slide, please. Just some kind of thoughts when I reflected back on offering these programs, just to be flexible. If you have little to no turnout, try to adapt the workshops to fit another need. So this is kind of something that I ran into personally with the workshops. I had little to no interest in the resume workshops. So about halfway through, I transitioned to advertising for job search workshops. I thought maybe people had a resume already that they really liked, and maybe they were just overwhelmed with the job market and didn't know where to start with searching for a job. So a resource that I was connected with from the Michigan Works was a website called the Pure Michigan Talent Connect, which I hadn't heard about. And then I also reaching out to the Michigan Works for their resources, because they want to help. They want to connect people with those resources in their communities. Next slide, please. So this just kind of gives you what the Pure Michigan Talent Connect website, what the main screen looks like. There's a lot of information that's able to be found on this website. So I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit in the next slides. Next slide, please. Some pros I would say about the Pure Michigan Talent Connect website: it's an up-to-date job source. I've used some other job, either like databases or where they post jobs, and a lot of times the jobs are out of date or they're not very recent. I would give them kudos for having the jobs that are up to date and that they take the jobs down quickly if they're no longer applicable. They also offer electronic soft skills training. If you have an account, it is kind of required that you create an account with them on the website, but there are a lot of benefits to that as well. So it offers some training on things such as problem solving, how to collaborate with others, and things of that nature. It also has the ability for a resume builder. So kind of just like an application, you fill out all the information you have for a resume, and it creates those items and saves them to their profile. And if you have one that you wanted to upload, there was also the option to upload a resume as well. It also offers a decent amount of online storage to save other documents as well, such as your resume, but also cover letters. If you have certificates for other trainings that you've created, you can scan those in like a PDF and save them right to your account. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for having all those files in one place. Next slide, please. Just some more things that it offers. There's also something called Pathfinder, which thinks more towards maybe your younger audience. So it's great for high school students that are trying to explore different colleges or career paths. I even found it kind of interesting to plug in some different things and compare some different occupations. So if there's a specific place you're considering of going to college or things of that nature and fields of study, it can show you some good colleges to go to for that field of study and what occupations fall under those fields of study as well. And for people that college might not be what their career path is leaning them towards, there's also information for skilled trades. So there's information on apprenticeships, and then it connects to the michigan.gov website to connect you with resources for certification and training offerings for different skilled trades. Also linking the michigan.gov website to link veterans with their specific employment services as well. Next slide, please. Just some kind of parting thoughts of trying something new that you might not feel as comfortable with is to not get discouraged. It may take multiple sets of sessions to get the word out to your community that you're offering these services. I know even just a couple days ago, I helped a patron with a resume, and I still have flash drives left over. So I offered a similar service that I was going to offer in the resume workshop just while I was here at the library. When I was posting the events on Facebook and things of that nature, even though patrons didn't hit going or didn't hit interested, there were a lot of likes or like the love reactions for the events. So It shows the community that you're offering a worthwhile service so that their tax dollars are being spent wisely. And consistency is key. So I'm going to try to plan another set of sessions in the spring for seasonal jobs or high school students that are probably maybe pursuing or trying to get their first job. Next slide, please. Those are my works cited, and we'll take questions at the end of all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. So our last panelist for this section on programming is Cindy Place. Cindy is the director at Bel Air Public Library.
Hello, as you said, I'm Cindy Place at Bel Air Public Library. Just a small brag, our library was named the 2021 State Librarians Excellence Award winner, which we are very proud of. We're a very small library, and it's something that, we worked hard to receive the recognition. Next slide, please. So I became the director at Bel Air Public Library in January 2020. I was on my own as director for about 2 weeks before COVID closed us down. At that time, I barely knew my staff. I had not met most of my patrons yet, and I was still completing my MLIS degree from Wayne State. But I inherited an amazing, patient staff, an extremely supportive board of trustees, and a network of neighboring library directors who were there for me every step of the way. We are a Class 1 library, which means that we're a district library. It means we're a small rural library. We have a service population of 3,700, and we have just over 1,200 patrons. We have a perpetual millage, so we don't have any millage renewal issues. And we have a summer population of over 10,000. We are a tourist destination. Our building is 4,000 square feet, and that includes limited storage, which means we have a shed out back. We have, in that space, we have bathrooms, a small kitchen, and a meeting room, which we share with our friends' used book sale area. With the closing of the library due to COVID, our staff began to meet virtually right away. We discussed immediate concerns. Our patrons' mental health was at the top of the list. Which programs we planned that could be made virtual easily, and what services our community would need for the next few weeks. Again, we thought this would be a few weeks of closure. We also started looking at websites and at other libraries, sometime much larger than ours, and we looked for programs that we could replicate here in Bel Air. Next slide, please. A wonderful and I think unique to the field characteristic of public libraries is their willingness to share ideas, program notes, even templates and guidelines for specific activities and events. While most libraries I have borrowed from are more than happy to share, I always give credit to those libraries who've graciously allowed us to replicate their programs and ideas. A COVID silver lining that I've found is that more and more libraries are emailing or posting information about upcoming virtual and live programming and inviting patrons from other libraries to participate, usually for free. Next slide, please. At the beginning of the lockdown, we created online surveys and made paper copies, which we left along with the 2019 tax return forms on a table outside our entrance. We asked our patrons what they needed now, what they would like to see done in the immediate future, and what ideas they had of programs or services we could provide during this short pandemic. As we all know now, in the end, this time would be prolonged and painful. But those survey results were very valuable as we researched which programs and services we could still provide and which programs we could offer virtually. When looking at the website of other libraries, we don't let ourselves get caught up in limitations. Those would come later once we decided which programs we would develop. Staff members shared responsibilities for this work based on interest and comfort level. In April 2020, we began posting a weekly virtual programming calendar on Facebook and our website. This is something any small library can do, and I stole the idea from some larger libraries. Links to programs were provided, as well as descriptions of the programs, programming from other libraries, cooking classes for the Michigan Extension Service, free yoga and fitness classes, web quests, and scavenger hunts. We even had a link to story times with American Sign Language and webcams at zoos and aquariums all over the world. And this information was posted every Sunday, and it just provided links and information to keep people engaged with the library. The one limitation is they had to have access to some kind of internet, which in our community is tough. We have open Wi-Fi at the library, and we did have people sitting in our parking lot watching some of these programs. Next slide, please. Once COVID mandates are eased and we were once again able to allow patrons into the library, which for us was about mid-July 2020, we moved our focus on providing new programs which would meet some of the needs our patrons and community members had expressed in the surveys. Our rubric for new programming included, do we have room for the program? Can we afford it? Or what grants are available to us? Which staff members want to facilitate which new programs? What are the best dates and times for programs? Is this passive versus in-person programming? And what other events are happening in Bel Air which might conflict? Next slide, please. We contacted for Prescription to Read, which is a program that we borrowed from the Toronto Public Library. We contacted local health and wellness providers, physicians, social workers, medical clinic staff, yoga instructors, therapists, and senior center staff. We sent letters to the providers and we described the program, and we requested suggestions for books and other materials that addressed medical or other informational needs that their patients or clients might want. We compiled this list of materials and we ordered the items. The way the program works is that medical and wellness providers we created these real small, they look like prescription pads that they kept in their offices. And when they would be meeting with a patient or a client, if there was a specific book that they knew we had, because we provided a list based on what they suggested, they would write the title down and give it to their patient or patron and the patient or client. And they could come into the library and either just take that paper and look for the book, or come to the desk and we could help them find the book. And then they were able to borrow it from the library. This did a couple of things. I am not a doctor. None of us here are wellness providers. And so this gave us a list of authenticated good books that local wellness and doctors suggested for us. We got great books on Alzheimer's, on caregivers with Alzheimer's, on diabetes, on behavior issues with children. We had quite a few wellness. The yoga instructors gave us some suggestions for books about yoga. So this was a way for us to have an authenticated collection, and it was also a way for us to engage with the local health and wellness providers and their patients. Bel Air participates in the Mel's Visiting Patron, and what that means is that almost all libraries in Michigan can use their library card here in Bel Air. What that did for us is it meant that even if a patient at a local adjacent community in St. Mansalona, which is close to us, if they didn't have our library card, they could still come and check out these Prescription to Read books. The cost of the program was $850 for books, $150 for prescription pads. Somebody could very, very easily do this for less money. If you don't have any funding, you could simply look at your collection and start with what you have. But it's really well worth the investment. And we actually found grant funding from Great Lakes Energy People Fund Grant. And this is a organization that provides heating services, gas services to our communities. And so for $1,000, I was able to start this program, and it's been very popular so far. Next slide. Another program that I actually participated in when I was a media specialist in Boyne City Public Schools is what we call Just Read. Just Read is a program that basically students before the end of the school year are asked to give us, any student can do this, K-12, whatever grades they were in, homeschool, remote school, it didn't matter. They just contacted us or went online. They have to choose up to 6 books. We asked them to be paperback for cost purposes. And then before the last day of school, students were given their first book. And then after they finished reading the first book, we asked them to somehow give us a review of the book. It could be just a written sentence. It could be calling us on the phone. Most people just came in and the kids would tell us about the book. I will tell you, as a librarian, there's nothing more fun than having a 5 or 6-year-old come in and explain to you why they liked the Captain Underpants book that they just read. And so it was a great way for us to connect with parents, with the schools. The schools were great about letting us hand this information out. And then after the kids tell us about the book, they basically get their next book up to 6 books. This program was funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services through the Library of Michigan for their small grant. It was $2,100. Is what we use to do this program. Again, you don't have to spend that much money. You don't have to have them pick 6 books. It could be 4 books. They come to the library to pick up the book. I have in the past delivered books to kids' houses. And during COVID, this kind of program, we participated with the school district because books were available on the buses that were going to their houses every week with lunch and homework when we were closed down. So there's lots of different ways you can use this program, but it was highly successful. And one of the reasons I developed this program when I was at the school is statistically we know that students that are poor readers, if they don't read during the summer, they can lose as much as 6 months of reading growth. Students that read at grade level, if they don't read in the summer, will lose that 3 months of reading growth. Good readers, you're just getting them good books. So the other positive is if a student starts participating in kindergarten and they continue to participate through their senior year of high school, 6 times 13, that's how many books they have in their private, they get to keep the books. So that's how many books they have in their private library. And of course, as they get older, they're getting different books. So it's been a great program. And I would highly recommend finding some way to do some small piece of this program. Next slide, please. And then another program, I went to an MLA, which is Michigan Library Association conference. And in that conference, I attended a session with Jen Taggart from Bloomfield Hills Township Library. She described a program where she conducted a sensory story time for adults with special needs. Her program involved the story time, but it also included activities on a grand scale like game nights, movie nights, etc. At Bel Air Public Library, we choose to simply offer a story time, which we do virtually right now. And we include reading 3 themed picture books. We sing a couple of songs, which include movement, the Itsy Bitsy Spider, for example. And then we demonstrate a simple tactile craft. The cost for this program is extremely minimal as we use craft items that we already have available. And as I've told many people, when I describe the sensory story time for adults with special needs, I don't think there's anything we do that's more important or is more rewarding than offering a program like this to our adults with special needs. We have several facilities in the area, and right now they're participating virtually. I have done this in person at Boyne City Public Library for 2 years. We got up to 37 special needs adults that showed up every month. We also open it to anybody who has a special need adult, and adults are anywhere from 18 to 24 and up. It just depends on what their definition is. But we had parents bringing their children. And my favorite story is there was a young man, probably in his 40s. He was in a wheelchair. He didn't communicate. He basically, his head was tipped to the side and he, was drooling and what you would imagine as somebody who's pretty severely disabled. And I was talking to him about the craft project that we were doing. And I put my hand on his shoulder as I was showing him what we were going to do, because he couldn't do it, but we were doing it for him. And he looked up at me with this beatific grin on his face. And it was all I could do to not lose it right there, because that made me realize that it doesn't matter what their disability, there's a person in there. And this is a program that we use to honor those people. Again, you do not have to be a big library to do something like this, but I highly, highly recommend looking at programs that help your special needs adults. It's awesome. Next slide, please. And then funding, just quickly apply for as many grants as you can. I create a template with the demographic information, and then I use a narration from other grant applications for new grants, but also to use for promotional material for the event. Makes grant writing a little bit easier. I've written a lot of grants and have gotten a lot of grants, so it's worth doing. Express your passion for the program when you're describing it, your activity in the grant application. Don't worry about being don't worry about writing something that you think they want to see. They want to see your passion for what it is that you want their money for. Remember local service organizations, Rotary, Kiwanis, women's clubs, they all are still giving out grants. Walmart, Target, Dollar General, Meijer. And ask for help always. Ask other librarians, ask other nonprofits. What do you do to get a grant? It's really the way, unfortunately, most of us have to go to provide programming, especially in small libraries. Next slide, please. And this is just a list of other projects and suggestions that we've done that we've borrowed from other libraries. Again, you are not limited. We took projects. The Toronto Public Library project was huge, and yet we made it small enough and it made it work for us. So there's really very few programs, except for ones out of reach by cost or space, that you can't do. So go for it. Next slide. And then these are just links that you'll get when you get the slides to the libraries I borrowed from and some of the programs that I use for gaming programming and stuff with their teens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. So that concludes the last of the 4 panelists, and we'll go through questions now. And I know Kelly's been monitoring chat, so I know we have some questions that we haven't been able to finish. Do you want to take over with that, Kelly?
Yes. Okay. We're going to start with Erin. There was a few questions for Erin. One of the first ones was, when you talked about doing your community conversations, how many people participated in those to get ideas about what it is that they wanted to see in their community or library?
Oh gosh, we tried to keep the actual conversations relatively small. Each conversation generally had between 10 and 15 people in it, but we did, I don't know, 15 or 20 conversations. So that process in itself was it probably took us a good 6 months to get that all put together. So, but smaller conversations so that people felt more comfortable with each other, because generally they were all strangers at the beginning, or at least only, acquaintances maybe.
Okay. And then there were several questions about your yoga and Zumba classes. Some of them you answered. There were questions about whether or not you pay your instructors, and you spoke about a grant that you received to pay some of those. So what were your plans when the grant runs out? Will you continue to pay the instructors, and does it cost for the participants to come?
Okay, let me see if I can remember all those questions in one. We did pay the Zumba and yoga instructors for this summer. We did a series. We had 6 sessions of yoga. It was it was broken into 2 chunks of 3 weeks each, but we did weekly classes. And all of our classes are free to the public. We have never charged the public for anything that we've done at the library. So we're pretty big sticklers about that, because our community is pretty economically depressed. So we don't charge for things because we feel that that's a barrier. But we did, in the past, we had done some individual sessions of chair yoga, and those were donated by the yoga instructor. And it actually is the same yoga instructor that we used this summer. But so she was willing, to do a one-off as a donation, but for a series, we did pay her. The grant that we received was actually the grant from this leadership class that we were doing. And for doing it next summer, we are planning on incorporating it into our regular programming budget, because it was so successful and everyone loved it so much. So that's how we plan on paying for that in the future. Okay. I think maybe I answered all the questions for that.
Yes, you did. Yep.
Okay.
And then the last question was about your walks. If you had a specific staff member who always leads the walks, or if you rotate around, and then what made you decide on 12:15 instead of try other times? Sure.
It's generally me. Walking club has been my baby. I do have some other staff members who will fill in if I'm not there for some reason. But actually my core people are such diehards that if for some reason none of the staff can do it, they'll lead as well. But yes, it's generally me out there in the snow or the sunshine. And 12:15, I was aiming to try to reach people who want to go for a walk on their lunch break. And so I aimed for 12:15 because I thought, okay, if they get out for lunch at noon, if they want to grab a quick bite, they have time. Or our town's not very big, so more than likely if they're working in town, it's not going to take them more than a minute or 2 to get to the library. So that part, I theoretically, I guess, could have done it at 12:05 or 12:10, but I just thought I'd put a little cushion in there in case they wanted to grab a bite, or if they have a customer standing in their office right at noon or whatever. So that's why we decided on 12:15. And I always make sure that we're done before 1 so that people can get back to their business at the end of lunch.
Okay, thank you. And then Stephanie, people were interested, and you talked that you let everyone choose what type of program they do, whether it is number of minutes, number of pages, number of titles. how do you keep that all straight? You mentioned you have a paper log or a digital. Do you have to tailor those differently for the different types of things people choose?
We have to tailor each of those differently, and we use the paper log for pages, but generally we'll use digital for the other ones. We keep track digitally here in the library.
Okay, so if a patron comes in and they want to do the number of pages read, they would get a paper log. If they
Yes.
want to use the number of titles, they would get something different.
They could do paper, and we keep everything here tracked digitally. So we'll enter it in a digital form. They can do it however they wish.
Okay, thank you. Amy, resumes. You kind of might have answered this a little bit, but do you use any specific resume program when you're working with your patrons?
I had kind of like in the presentation when I mentioned the Pure Michigan Talent Connect, but I know sometimes patrons are wary of having to remember another password. So that's why I also had paper. There are like they're called like resume builder papers. You can adapt them. I adapted one of mine from a college. They had one that they offered, and I adapted and gave credit to them for that. So that was also something that I could give the patron if they were coming for the appointment, because I know sometimes people can't remember dates or when they worked at a certain job or things like that. So it was like a rough outline of the information that they wanted to include in their resume, and then they would bring that to the session to give us kind of like a framework.
Well, you just answered the second question, because
Okay.
it was going to be whether you gave them the resume worksheet before they came, so that they already had that filled out to work with. So would you be willing to, when the slides come out, share that template that you use?
Yes, I believe it is the one linked in my slide deck, but if it
Okay.
not I will share that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Cindy, same kind of questions as Erin. You talked about doing surveys. Did you have a lot of, and this is my own personal question, because I swear if we do a survey, no one fills it out, or you get like 3. So when you were doing surveys to see what kind of things people were interested in, how was your response to those surveys?
You know, it's interesting. Our response was pretty darn good, because it was during COVID, and we had people coming to the library in panic because they needed their tax forms. And I kind of attached those surveys to the tax forms. And so when they grabbed it, I want to say we probably had about 57 people respond, which is actually really good. And it was a cross section of people. It was young and old. And so we kind of ran with it. And we did the same thing. If they did it by paper, we put it in digitally ourselves so that we had a spreadsheet.
How, your surveys, how broad were there?
They were pretty narrow. They were, I didn't ask for their name, but basically, are you a resident or are you a visitor? Because that was important to us, knowing when to do this. And just, what kinds of programs are you interested in? And we kind of put them down in, different categories. And then what do you think our library, or why do you come to our library? And what do you think, what kind of programs and what kind of materials do you want our library to carry? So it was pretty broad, which meant a lot of writing because there was lots of comments. But it also, I will tell you, rather than pick a multiple choice, those are the kinds of surveys that you will get better information from.
If you still have that survey, would you send it with the slides? Because even if no one else is, I'm very interested.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
It may take some digging.
Okay, thank you. And then Lisa asked if you would share your book list too.
Yep, already wrote that down. So I will share my prescription to read book list. There wasn't a book list for just read. I will tell you, choice is the most important part of that program. Kids got to choose what they wanted. So, but I do have a list of books for prescription to read, and I will send that.
Okay, thank you. And then, so on your special needs programming that you did, and as a special needs mom, you made me cry a little bit. But somebody asked about your advertising, where you advertise and how you do it so that it's sensitive to the community.
Okay, so the first thing I did was contact there are several facilities, daycare places, Bergman Center, learning places that house or take care of adults with special needs right during the day. So I actually personally contacted each of those people. We also have a thing called Michigan Disability Network. And in the network, I did, let those folks know that we were offering the program. Probably the most successful was getting a hold of individual organizations that work with disabled adults. But then I just put it on our webpage. I put it out on Facebook. As a special needs mom, Kelly, you probably also, or any who has a special needs child or adult, you're looking for those opportunities a lot of times. And so we were able to connect with a lot of people in their homes. And then sensitivity, you mean about what I read or what we...
I think people were, the question more towards political correctness isn't necessarily the correct word, but making it so that it's sensitive to the community and not seen as choppy.
I think by calling it a sensory story time for special needs adults, that, or adults with disabilities, I think is what we called it, because it was the appropriate language at the time. And we really didn't run into any problems. So I guess actually the biggest concern was making sure that the books we chose were not an insult.
And that was the next question, is what types of books and how did you figure that out?
Well, again, Jen Taggart at Bloomfield Hills Township was awesome to get me started. But there are certain authors, and I can actually put together a list of books that we used. I will tell you, non-fiction books are really popular. So we would read books about, at least one of the books would be about, say we're doing oceans, and it would be about fish. And you have to also learn, just like you would in a children's storybook time, you have to learn to ask open-ended questions, because the special needs adults are anywhere from that young man that I talked about to just folks with Down syndrome, or with EI issues, or blind or deaf, so you're dealing with all sorts of intellectual levels. And I was really careful to make sure that the books I was reading would be something that would be interesting to an older person, even though in many cases their reading level is at kindergarten, but sometimes their understanding levels are higher than that. And it's just like reading out loud to a high school student. Honestly, they just love to hear your voice. I did do the books were all scanned in, so that they were presented on Google Drive when it was live on a screen. In Zoom, they see the full book. This is really important because they need to see what you're reading. You can't just sit there with a book and assume that they can see the words or see the pictures. And tactile and sensory is really important to that particular population. So does that answer your questions?
Yes, I think so. And then
I'll get together a list of books that we've used over the years, because it is important to pick the right books.
Okay. And then Shannon, you may have seen it in chat. Somebody asked if there was a hashtag to use on Twitter if they wanted to mention anything about the conference.
Yes, I posted the hashtag in chat. It is hashtag leading big. Popped it back into chat. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to our 4 presenters here this morning. Thanks for all the great questions and for everyone joining this panel on programming today. Our next panel is in the same room, room B. We'll start at 11:30, so we have a short break, and the topic is administration. So hope that you can join us again for the wrap up on our last panel, number 4, administration, here in room B. If you have any questions, let me know in chat. I'll be hanging around in there getting things set up. But for everyone else, thanks again for joining us, and look forward to seeing the URLs and recording links and everything in a few days to the email you used with your registration.